Well, my first guest is Joshua Lisec, who's a self-taught international ghostwriter who has worked on more than 100 books since 2011, including 2 New York Times bestsellers. He turned ghostwriting into a personal brand and now commands 6-figure fees, working with everyone from CEOs and business owners to older, wealthy clients who want an heirloom to pass down to future generations. His latest book, so good they call you a fake. Joshua Lisec joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. How are you? Oh, can you hear me, Josh?
I'm well. Thank you for having me on. Okay. Yes, I sure can.
Yeah,
thank you.
Fantastic. There's a bit of a delay, so I wasn't quite sure. Tell me a bit about how you got into ghostwriting.
It was actually completely by accident. I started my literary journey as a novelist, as a somewhat of a youngster, and something interesting happened when I was out signing copies and meeting my readers and fans. And that was that 2 individuals who read my book, 2 older individuals, senior citizens. Both of them read my novels and enjoyed them, and then said, Joshua, I have wanted to write a book longer than you have even been alive. Can you help me out here? And I said, okay, fine, sure, I'll help you with your book. And I've been saying, okay, fine, sure, ever since.
And what is the art of good ghostwriting?
It's where you take the stories, anecdotes, insights, and experiences of the author, and you don't simply transcribe them. We don't do transcription, we do translation. And that's where I hear their experiences, and I create a coherent narrative to it, or a structure. If it's a how-to kind of a book, we develop, let's say, a system or a process to their ideas, beginning with the scaffolding of an outline and then expand from there, simply following the best practices of whatever their genre of nonfiction that they want to produce, whether it's an autobiography or a business book or science and technology.
And it sounds like it is not necessarily about the traditional publishing route, i.e., the big, whoever they might be, the Penguins, the Orions of this world, but it is along the lines of self-publishing as well.
I have done both. Actually, all 3, I would say. I've done books with and for major publishers, smaller independent publishers, and also simply independent authors who are able to use new technologies like e-readers and print-on-demand production of books to reach their people where there's no middleman, let's say.
When you are trying to tell someone's life story, though, people will give you everything. How do you determine what should be in and what should be out?
Well, the first few books were a bit difficult because I would spend a year or more interviewing an individual every single week and then spend another year or so trying to make a story out of it. Now what I do instead is I'll ask an author or an aspiring author, what is the message or the one theme or the thesis that when people are done reading this book, they take away from? And in the case of personal branding, I'll ask someone who's a public figure, how do you want people to feel about you? And then there's usually a couple sentence explanation. And then I say, okay, that's what we're going to write about. So then we interview the author based only on those things that are going to most, let's say, fit with that theme and pretty much leave everything else out.
And I'm curious, at one point, certainly in the past, the notion of ghostwriting was not even mentioned. You wouldn't hear, you would just see the person's name on the front page, front book, and you'd be like, oh, that person has written the book. When did it become more acceptable to say it was ghostwritten or it was co-written with someone?
I noticed this with the digital marketing space actually about 10 years ago, because what would happen is copywriters, who are, freelance writers who write sales pages and product descriptions, they were sort of being shared amongst the most successful internet marketers. And then copywriters would also ghostwrite, let's say, speeches or video sales letters. They would write ebooks and books. And in the same way that copywriters were well known, they even had their own personal brands, ghostwriting has become a bit like copywriting, in that more and more nowadays, there are fewer non-disclosure agreements. There used to be quite a bit of those in the past, even for me. But nowadays, it's like copywriting where, hey, who was the writer you used for that? I want them to do my book too.
And I'm curious how you get the stuff out of people, because sometimes things are buried deep within and they don't necessarily remember everything. Are there certain techniques that you use in order to engage their long-lost memories?
Yes, that's correct. I ghostwrote a number of books on hypnosis and hypnotherapy a few years ago, and that introduced me to some of these techniques for memory retrieval. And so I then studied hypnosis and became a certified hypnotist and became a member of the National Guild. And so I'm able to now use some of those techniques while interviewing clients to draw some of their lost and forgotten greatness out of them.
And I mean, would you say that it is better for a person to have a ghostwriter than to try to write their own memoir?
In my professional opinion, yes, and I'm incentivized to say that, so I can admit to that. But the reason it is, there's two aspects to writing a memoir yourself. There's the actual writing of the book, structuring it properly, creating a solid narrative, writing it like it's fiction, where there's setting descriptions, there's characterization, there's dialogue. So it reads like a novel. That's what a good memoir is. It reads like a novel. And then there's the aspect of you remembering everything associated with your story and deciding what all you want to include in the story. There's those two aspects of it. And so it's more enjoyable for a memoir client to focus on their story, their memories, their anecdotes, their experiences, their insights, while someone else worries about structuring it all properly, and they can just sort of sit back and relax and enjoy the ride.
Well, you say enjoy the ride. It's a costly ride. I mean, I understand it could be anything upwards from $100,000. That sounds like a lot to pay for someone to write your memoir.
It could be, yes. I would say it's similar in fee structure to a small business hiring a digital marketing agency for a year, in terms of like working with an agency for a year. That's pretty close to what they would expect to pay. And so in their mind, that's sort of the monthly installments that they have in their mind. Okay, this is similar to digital marketing agency that we might have hired for one of our personal brand awareness campaigns, but it's going to give us something that lasts much longer than a single year's marketing campaign.
How long does it take you to ghostwrite a book? And do you write several together, or is it always concentrating on one at a time?
Nowadays, I average about 10 book projects a year, but they're staggered. So I'm doing 3 to 4 at a given time, usually without much overlap to number 5 or 6. So it's a sort of a 1 to 2 quarters a year type of activity.
You must have a magnificent brain, because there's so much that you need to retain.
Yeah, there really is. I like to joke nowadays that I've forgotten about more books that I've written on a subject than most people have ever read on that subject.
And how, I mean, we're going to be, later on, we're going to be talking about AI psychosis. I wonder what your thoughts are about artificial intelligence and the impact it potentially might have on your business.
What I'm already noticing now is, interestingly, certainty from clients that they do not want to use AI. They want to use a human. We tried to use AI. I opened up Claude or ChatGPT or Grok, and, I gave it some of my experiences. I did the speech to text, and I said to write it up into a nice story, and it was awful, and I sounded terrible, and I don't even like my life. I need a human to do this right. That's what I'm hearing now.
Oh, well, that must bring you some comfort, although, of course, AI can be so quick, and maybe because of the way people are interacting with it, in a few years' time, you may find yourself not necessarily out of a job, but with less opportunities.
That is possible, and there's a risk in my profession, no doubt, though at the same time, that does affect all the professions, which is why in 2018, when GPT-1 was released privately to a select group of academics, journalists, and researchers, I read an article, I believe it was in The Guardian, actually, about this, and it was a sample output from GPT-1, and it did not read particularly well back in 2018, but I saw the writing on the wall in those days, and I realized, I cannot be an anonymous professional writer. I can't continue to be a ghostwriter behind the scenes. I need to start offering my own books. I need to build my own personal brand. So when someone says they want a ghostwriter or they want to work with someone to write their book, they could use AI, or they could use, and then they think of a person. They don't think of just a ghostwriter, but they think of a person. In this case, Joshua Lisec.
Oh, now that's really interesting, because it has catapulted you maybe into a space that maybe a few years ago you wouldn't have thought you would be in. Is there like a society of ghostwriters?
I'm not aware of anything like that. I don't really network with other people inside of my profession. In fact, most of the people that I know professionally are hypnotists as opposed to writers.
Why is that?
I think it might be because so many of the techniques of hypnosis are useful for actually writing nonfiction books. They're useful for drawing the truth, memories, experiences, and wisdom out of clients, and of course, packaging it up as well.
Have you ever been in a situation where you have agreed to ghostwrite a book and then after, I don't know how many months or whatever it might be, just thought, I can't do this, or the client has decided not to go ahead?
There have been a few situations like that. There haven't been many. I'm pretty good nowadays at vetting and filtering who I do and don't want to work with. But there have been a couple that I've found out about, let's call them extreme integrity issues associated with their story or what it is that they've been up to, where there might have been something that was, let's say, at minimum, a gray market type of a story where, wait a second, are you describing potentially criminal behavior? Yes. I don't want to be a participant in this, you see.
Have you ever had anyone, I mean, in terms of the secrets that people tell, maybe they're willing to tell the world now, but you have looked at it askance and thought, well, actually, this is potentially very difficult in terms of what the impact might be?
I've had a few of those, yes. Over the years, I've done a few memoirs and autobiographies of ex-convicts, that is, people who have spent a significant amount of time in prison for drug trafficking, even homicide, and they've done what they did to sort of turn their lives around and do what they can to make amends, penance, etc., etc. And some of the stories that you learn about that side of society that operates in the shadows, be they pimps or Macs or otherwise what we might call gangbangers, it's a very interesting perspective. You learn a lot about how the way the world really works.
And just in conclusion, you've written so many of these books. Is there a person you wish you could write about who wouldn't necessarily employ you, but you think, gosh, I'd really like to grapple with your story?
A person that I would like to write about, I aspire to write the official presidential memoir of our 48th president here in the United States, Donald J. Trump.
Why?
I think that would be interesting because there's not been a U.S. president or public figure like him. I know several members of the administration personally, and I hear some things that are quite fascinating to me. And he and his vice president, J.D. Vance, have endorsed a couple of books that I have co-authored myself as well. So there might be an open door there in the future, potentially.
Well, we'll have you back when that happens. I'm sure it will. Joshua, in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon here in London. That was Joshua Lisec speaking about his work as a ghostwriter.